Hello. Welcome to Twisted Stories, where intriguing and unexpected stories come to life. Please support the channel by following and sharing. In the sprawling, restless city of New York lived a young woman named Alara Winters. To the wealthy patrons she occasionally served and the hurried crowds she navigated through, she was nearly invisible, just another girl trying to survive, her face blending into the background. Her life from the outside seemed simple, only work and quiet existence. But inside the cramped apartment she called home in the Bronx, a different story unfolded, thick with the scent of yesterday's fears. Ara woke at 4 in the morning. Pulled from restless sleep, not by light, but by the sound of her mother coughing, wet and rattling, the kind that brought blood. She rushed to find her mother, Margaret, trembling with a stained cloth pressed to her lips. In the corner stood her 8-year-old brother, Ethan, eyes wide with terror, his small hands signing frantically. He had been mute since birth, and his silence in moments like these felt heavier than any scream. She signed back that everything would be fine. A lie she had told so many times it no longer felt like lying. The cancer was stage 3, and without insurance, they were watching her mother fade one cough at a time. The apartment walls were stained with mold. Pipes leaked brown water. Cockroaches crawled freely. The refrigerator held only expired milk and bread she had to cut mold from before giving to Ethan. On the table sat a mountain of bills. Hospital fees long overdue. Rent 2 months late. Nearly $90,000 in debt. The landlord had come 3 days ago, his threats of eviction sharp as knives. 2 weeks earlier, she had lost her job for refusing to provide special services to a customer. But today, there was work, a last-minute shift at a charity gala at the Obsidian Hotel. The pay was more than a week of wages, a lifeline she clung to with desperate hope. She had heard whispers about the Obsidian, that it belonged to dangerous people who made others disappear. She dressed in her black and white uniform, hand-washed and dried overnight. Her mother stirred, finding Ara in the dim light. "You are leaving," she whispered. "Yes, Mama." "Be careful, my daughter. Those places are not for people like us, and the men there are dangerous." Forced a tired smile. "Just one night, I will bring something home," she promised. A vow she had made 100 times. Hours later, she stood in the service basement with 20 other temporary workers, their anxious faces lit by harsh fluorescent lights. Helena Cross, the event coordinator, stood before them with a clipboard like a weapon. "Listen up," Helena barked. "You are replaceable. One mistake and you are out. No pay, no second chance." Her gaze landed on Ara. "You are on VIP service. You will serve the guest of honor exclusively. Do not speak unless spoken to. You are wallpaper. The guest of honor is Nicola Salvatore." Ara's breath caught. Everyone knew that name. The most ruthless mafia boss in New York. His foundation funded scholarships she had once dreamed of. Applications still hidden under her mattress. Hopes that died when she dropped out to protect her family. Serving him now felt like fate mocking her. She nodded, her face a mask of calm she did not feel. She would be invisible. She would make no mistake. If you want to know the satisfying ending and the gleeful revenge that awaits, like this video, share it with someone who loves good stories, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Because tonight, the invisible girl is about to do something no one will ever forget. Was escorted upstairs by a security guard to familiarize herself with the layout before the guests arrived. She stepped out of the elevator and froze, as if she had crossed into another world, a world she had only ever seen in dreams or on the old television screens and hospital waiting rooms. The grand hall of the Obsidian Hotel unfolded before her like a palace from a fairy tale, but the kind of fairy tale meant for those who held the power of life and death, not for poor girls from the Bronx. The black marble floor gleamed so flawlessly that she could see her own reflection in it. White veins running through the stone like frozen silver rivers in a sea of night. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the soaring ceiling. Thousands of crystals scattering a warm glow like imprisoned stars. Each chandelier likely worth more than the decaying apartment her family was living in. All swallowed hard, forcing her face to remain still, refusing to show the awe she felt. She was invisible. She reminded herself. And invisible people weren't allowed to have feelings. Everywhere around her, teams of staff moved with the precision of an orchestra conducted by an unseen hand. They spread pristine white silk tablecloths. The kind of silk that knew just by touching it cost more than her entire month's rent. Polished silver plates were lined up in perfect order. Gold-plated cutlery gleamed beneath the lights. crystal glasses so delicate they seemed as if they could shatter with a single breath. She passed the bar area and saw bottles of liquor lined up on the shelves. Names she couldn't pronounce because they were in French or Italian. But she knew each bottle was worth 3 months of her mother's medication. 3 months. 3 months her mother could live longer. Hope longer. Watch Ethan grow just a little more. All of it locked inside a single bottle that people here would empty in minutes and forget. But what made chest tighten wasn't the liquor, or the crystal, or the silk. It was the flowers. Massive floral arrangements stood throughout the hall, each one reaching her chest, overflowing with pure white lilies, pale purple orchids, and deep red roses the color of blood. A sweet fragrance filled the air, a kind of luxury scent she had never known. She stopped in front of one arrangement, staring at the flawless petals without a single crease, and her mind began calculating on its own. One rose here, just one, was probably worth a week of pain medication for her mother. This entire arrangement could pay for a full round of chemotherapy, and there were dozens like it scattered across the hall. Hundreds of flowers that would wilt after tonight and be thrown away like trash. While her mother was wasting away on a damp bed because there was no money for medicine, a surge of anger rose in Lara's chest, hot and bitter. She wanted to scream, to ask why the world was this unfair, why some people could throw money at decorative flowers while others had to choose between buying bread or buying medicine. But she swallowed the rage like bitter honey because she knew anger wouldn't help. Anger wouldn't pay the debts. Anger wouldn't cure cancer. Anger would only cost her her job. And losing her job meant losing the last fragile lifeline she had. She kept moving, slipping between the other staff like a shadow. She watched the way they folded napkins into swans, the way they placed each glass exactly a hand's width apart, the way they inspected every fork for the smallest flaw. Perfection taken to an obsessive extreme. She wondered if the people who would sit at these tables ever noticed that perfection, or if to them it was simply expected, like the sun rising each morning. Maybe that was the greatest difference between the rich and the poor. She thought the poor were grateful for every scrap of bread, while the rich didn't even look at a feast. She stopped at the VIP table, the place she would serve tonight. It stood on a platform higher than the rest of the hall, like a throne gazing down upon its subjects. The chairs were upholstered in black velvet, tall, backed, and imposing, each one like a small throne for the kings and queens of the underworld. This was where Nicholas Salvatore would sit. This was where she would have to stand and serve, head bowed and silent, while the most powerful man in New York ate and laughed just a few steps away from her. All drew in a deep breath. She had stepped into paradise, but this was the devil's paradise, and she was nothing more than a tiny ant trying not to be crushed beneath expensive shoes. All was checking the placement of the glasses on the VIP table when a voice sliced through the air like a blade, sharp, cold, and dripping with contempt. She turned her head and saw a woman enter the grand hall. No, not enter, but appear as if the entire room had been created solely as a backdrop for her. Victoria Ashford wore a blazing red gown the color of blood, diamonds cascading over her neck and wrists, each stone glittering beneath the chandeliers like tiny imprisoned stars against her ivory skin. Her golden blonde hair was styled into flawless waves that spilled over her shoulders. Her face perfectly made up without a single flaw. Her red lips curved into a smile that instantly recognized as fake. She was beautiful, breathtakingly so, but it was the cold beauty of a statue, perfect and lifeless. Trailing behind Victoria was a photographer clutching a professional camera, and 2 makeup artists hovering like obedient puppies. Victoria stopped in the center of the hall, swept her gaze around, then frowned. Irritation clearly etched on her face, as if she had just caught an unpleasant smell. "This lighting won't do," she declared, her voice echoing through the room. "It makes my skin look washed out. Fix it." A technician hurried over to adjust the lights while Victoria stood there with her arms crossed, fingers tapping impatiently against her arm. She looked toward the stage where the speech would take place and strode forward with long commanding steps. "I'll stand here when I introduce Nicholas," Victoria told the photographer. "3/4 angle, remember, not straight on. Straight on makes my nose look bigger. And when I hug him, shoot from the left. The left is my best side." She tested a few poses, tilting her head left then right, checking the shadows on her face, as if this were a magazine photo shoot, and not a charity gala. Ara stood motionless in a corner, watching in silence. She noticed that Victoria didn't glance once at the banners about underprivileged children hanging on the walls. Didn't spare a second for the scholarship flyers laid out on the tables. To her, tonight wasn't a charity event. Tonight was the night of Victoria Ashford, and everything else was merely a prop. A young waitress accidentally passed by at the exact moment Victoria was posing, blocking the camera's view. Victoria spun around, her blue eyes icy and sharp. "Are you blind?" she hissed, her voice venomous. "Or is your brain as empty as the tray you're carrying?" The waitress trembled and bowed her head in apology. But Victoria wasn't finished. She stepped closer and without a word of warning, slapped the girl hard across the face. The sound cracked through the hall, freezing everyone in place. "Watch where you're going next time," Victoria said coolly, then turned away, as if she had just brushed dust from her dress. No one dared to speak. The waitress stood there, one hand clutching her reeling cheek, tears threatening to spill, but not daring to fall. Ara felt her blood boil. She wanted to step forward, wanted to say something, but her feet felt nailed to the floor. She remembered being booed by her old restaurant manager, remembered the humiliation of being treated like trash. She understood the look in that waitress's eyes. The look of someone who knew she had no right to fight back, no right to be angry, only the right to bow her head and endure because she needed the money. Victoria stepped out onto the small balcony at the corner of the hall, pulled out her phone, and turned her back to the room. Ara wasn't trying to eavesdrop. She was only moving toward the drink preparation area, and happened to pass by. But Victoria's voice carried to her ears, low but clear enough to hear. "Is everything ready?" Victoria asked, her tone completely different from her earlier arrogance. Darker, more secretive. "Good. Tonight will end everything. After tonight, it'll all be ours." She paused, listening to the person on the other end, then let out a soft laugh, cold as a winter wind. "Don't worry, he doesn't suspect a thing. He trusts me completely." Victoria ended the call, turned back with a radiant smile, as if she had been discussing the weather, and walked back into the hall to continue posing for the photographer. Ara stood there, her heart pounding wildly. She didn't understand what she had just heard, but something felt wrong. Something dark lurked beneath those whispered words. The survival instinct sharpened by years of hardship warned her that something wasn't right. Though she didn't know what it was, she shook her head, trying to push the thought away. This wasn't her concern. She was just a waitress. She only needed to stay invisible, finish her job, and take the money home to her mother. The schemes of the rich had nothing to do with her. Yet, Victoria's words echoed in her mind like a curse. "Tonight will end everything." Ara was still thinking about Victoria's mysterious phone call when the atmosphere in the grand hall abruptly changed. There were no drums, no announcements, no spectacle of any kind. Yet she felt the shift as clearly as if the temperature in the room had dropped several degrees. Staff members who had been moving suddenly froze, whispered, conversations fell silent, and every gaze turned toward the side entrance. Turned her head, and for the first time in her life, she saw Nicholas Salvatore in the flesh. He entered through the side door, not the main entrance like Victoria, as if he didn't need anyone's attention to assert his presence. And he truly didn't. His presence alone was an irresistible force, like a black hole pulling all light and attention toward itself without effort. He was taller than she had imagined, likely over 1.8 m, broad-shouldered, his physique honed and contained beneath a perfectly tailored black suit, the kind that cost more than an entire year of her wages just by looking at it. His hair was ink black, slicked back to reveal a sharply defined face with a jawline that looked carved from stone. But what couldn't look away from were his eyes, grey like the sky before a storm, cold and unfathomably deep, as if they could see straight through anyone's soul. And the scar, a faint scar ran from his temple down to his left cheekbone. Not long, but long enough to tell a story of violence and survival. It didn't make him less handsome. If anything, it made him more dangerous. A silent warning that this was a man who had walked through hell and lived. Ara remembered the rumors about the failed assassination 5 years earlier, when someone had tried and failed to kill him. People said he had taken revenge with his own hands, and none of those behind the plot were still alive to tell the tale. Walking just behind Nicholas was a large, solidly built, middle-aged man with the expressionless face of a statue. Tony Russo, all guessed, the boss's driver and most trusted bodyguard. She had heard whispers about Tony, that he had once been a mercenary before Nicholas' father saved his life, and that he had been loyal unto death ever since. The two men moved as one. Tony always positioned to shield Nicholas from any threat, his eyes sweeping the room like radar, searching for danger. Victoria spotted Nicholas and transformed instantly, the disdain she had shown, the staff vanished, replaced by a radiant smile and sparkling eyes, as if she had just seen the love of her life. She hurried over, her heels clicking against the marble, and looped her arm through Nicholas with perfectly rehearsed affection. "Darling, I missed you so much," she murmured loudly enough for those nearby to hear. But noticed something no one else seemed to because no one dared to look closely. Nicholas didn't return the embrace. His arm hung loosely at his side. His body didn't lean toward Victoria by even a millimeter, and those grey eyes looked elsewhere, as if his mind was very far away. It was the cold distance of two strangers, not of an engaged couple. At that moment, a young waitress carrying a tray of crystal glasses passed by, likely overwhelmed by the boss's arrival, tripped over a chair leg, and pitched forward. The tray tilted, the expensive glasses sliding to one side on the verge of crashing to the floor. Ara saw everything slow down, imagined the sound of shattering glass. Helena's furious shouting and the poor waitress being thrown out with nothing to her name, but it didn't happen. Nicholas, with lightning-fast reflexes, stepped forward and caught the waitress by the arm, steadying her while his other hand gripped the edge of the tray to keep it from tipping further. The glasses trembled but didn't fall. "Careful," he said, his voice low and calm, as if he had just picked up a fallen leaf rather than saved someone from disaster. "The floor is slippery." The waitress stood there shaking, her face pale, lips moving without sound. Nicholas didn't wait for thanks. He simply gave a small nod and moved on, as if what he had done wasn't worth mentioning. Ara stood there, witnessing it all, a strange confusion rising inside her. She had prepared herself to serve a devil, a cold-blooded killer. Everyone feared. But that devil had just saved a waitress from being fired without asking for a word of gratitude. She glanced at Victoria, still clinging to Nicholas' arm with her fake smile, and remembered how she had slapped a staff member simply for crossing the camera's view. They were about to be married, yet they were worlds apart. One struck a worker for being in the way. One steadied a worker to keep her from falling. Ara didn't know what kind of man Nicholas Salvatore truly was. He might be a killer. He might be the monster people whispered about, but in that moment, he was infinitely kinder than his beautiful fiancée, and that only deepened her confusion about the man she would be serving all night long. All tried to push the image of Nicholas steadying the waitress out of her mind and refocus on her work. She moved back toward the VIP table for one final check before the guests arrived, making sure everything was perfect, just as Helena demanded. The glasses had to gleam. The napkins had to be folded precisely. The cutlery had to be aligned. She bent down to adjust a glass that was slightly out of place. So absorbed in that small detail that she didn't notice someone walking toward her. When she straightened and turned, she collided with a wall. No, not a wall. A solid chest. The faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with something unmistakably masculine and dangerous. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized who she had just run into. Nicholas Salvatore stood directly in front of her, close enough that she could have counted every stitch on the lapel of his suit if she had dared to look up. But she didn't dare. She dropped her gaze instantly, her heart pounding like a war drum, her hands gripping the hem of her uniform so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to control it. "I wasn't watching where I was going. Please forgive me." She waited for the anger, for the shouting, for being thrown out just as Helena had warned. One mistake and she would disappear, unpaid, without a second chance. She had made that mistake, and now everything was over. But the shouting never came. Instead, there was silence, stretching for several seconds that felt like centuries. Then a low, steady voice spoke. Not angry, not cold, only touched with a gentle curiosity she hadn't expected. "What's your name?" All froze. She wasn't sure she had heard correctly. The most feared mafia boss in New York was asking her name. A temporary waitress, who would vanish from this world after tonight, as if she had never existed. She swallowed, still unable to lift her head. "Ah? Ah, Winters." Her voice was barely above a breath, and she wondered if he could even hear it. "Ara," he repeated. And the way he said her name made it sound unfamiliar, almost melodic, as if he were tasting each syllable carefully. "Ara Winters." Then he said something she never could have anticipated. Something that would carve itself into her memory forever. "Lift your head." She didn't react, thinking she must have misheard. "Lift your head," he repeated, his voice still calm, but softened by something she couldn't name. "You don't owe anyone your gaze. Don't bow your head as if you're guilty." Ara slowly raised her head, as if her neck were rusted and every centimeter required effort, and then her eyes met his. Those grey eyes looked straight at her, not through her the way wealthy people usually did, but at her, truly seeing her as a person rather than a shadow. There was no contempt in them, none of the indifference she had learned to accept. There was only pure attention, as if in that moment she were the only person in the room worth looking at. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but to Alara, it felt as long as an entire lifetime. She didn't know how to respond, didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had ever told her to lift her head instead of bowing it. Her whole life, she had been taught to lower her gaze, to make herself small, to remain invisible. And now, the most powerful man in this city, the man everyone feared, had told her not to bow her head. Nicholas gave a small nod, as if he had just completed some unspoken ritual, then walked away, leaving standing in the glittering hall with a heart-beating rhythm she couldn't name. She watched his back disappear into the crowd of staff, and wondered whether she had just met a devil, or an angel. Or maybe, just maybe, he was both. The grand hall of the Obsidian flared to life, as the first guests began to arrive. Ara stood at her assigned position near the VIP table, a silver tray balanced in her hands, her face fixed in the professional, emotionless calm she had learned through years of serving. Inside, however, her mind still lingered on the brief encounter with Nicholas, his words echoing like a melody she couldn't shake. She didn't owe anyone her gaze. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever looked at her the way he had. She gave a small shake of her head, and forced herself to focus. This wasn't the time to dwell on meaningless thoughts. She was here to work, to earn money, to save her mother, not to be unsettled by the grey eyes of a mafia boss. Guests filed in one by one, expensive suits and glittering evening gowns, diamonds and gold catching the light of the chandeliers. They laughed, shook hands, exchanged polite embraces with smiles that never reached their eyes. Ara realized this wasn't merely a charity gala. This was a stage for the powerful, a place where silent deals were sealed with glances and subtle nods. She spotted faces she guessed belonged to bosses of other mafia families. Men with the eyes of predators and women as beautiful and deadly as vipers at their sides. All attention gravitated toward the VIP table where Nicolas Salvatore sat like a king upon his throne. Victoria sat beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm, her radiant smile never fading. She laughed at the right moments, spoke the right words, tilted her head at the perfect angle whenever a camera turned their way. It was a flawless performance of the perfect fiancé. But who had survived by observing her whole life, noticed what the cameras missed, the slight shudder that ran through Victoria when Nicholas touched her, as if she were suppressing revulsion. The way her eyes skimmed past Nicholas, searching for someone else in the crowd. The way her smile vanished the instant no one was watching, revealing a face cold and calculating. Ara poured champagne into Nicholas' glass, lowering her head just enough to show respect, but not as deeply as she once would have. She remembered his words and kept her back a little straighter. He didn't look at her, absorbed in conversation with the man beside him. Yet she sensed that he knew she was there. She poured for Victoria, who didn't bother to acknowledge her, as if Ara were nothing more than air, then moved to the place of the man Nicholas was speaking with, Marco Benedetti. Ara had heard Helena mention the name during the assignments, Salvatore's advisor, the most trusted man in the family. He appeared to be around 40, his hair threaded with grey, his face carrying the refined handsomeness of a gentleman. Yet something in his eyes unsettled her, a cunning hidden beneath the trustworthy exterior. As she poured champagne for Marco, she caught his gaze flick toward Victoria, swift as lightning, but unmistakable. It wasn't the look of a man glancing at his boss's fiancée. It was the look of a lover, heated and full of desire. She continued to observe as she moved around the table like a shadow. The discreet touches beneath the tablecloth between Victoria and Marco when the fabric shielded them from view. A small slip of paper passed from Victoria's hand to Marcos, as she pretended to reach for a napkin. The looks they exchanged whenever Nicholas turned away to speak with someone else. Brief yet laden with meaning. All felt her stomach tighten. She wasn't foolish. She knew what she was seeing. Victoria Ashford, Nicolas Salvatore's beautiful fiancée, was having an affair with his right hand. Yet, there was something more. A sense of unease she couldn't name. She remembered the phone call she had overheard earlier. Victoria whispering that tonight would end everything. She watched the way Victoria and Marco looked at each other. Not with the eyes of secret lovers, but with the eyes of conspirators waiting for something. Something was going to happen tonight. She felt it in the air, in the tension Victoria tried to mask behind her smile. In the way Marco kept checking his watch, as if counting down to a critical moment. All told herself it wasn't her concern. She was just a waitress. She only needed to finish her job and go home to her mother and Ethan. The schemes of the powerful had nothing to do with her. But a small part of her, The part that had seen Nicholas steady the stumbling, the part that had heard him say she didn't need to bow her head, felt a strange worry she couldn't explain. She shook it away. Nicholas Salvatore was a mafia boss. He had an entire army protecting him. He didn't need the concern of a poor girl from the Bronx, and she shouldn't care about his fate. She shouldn't care at all. Ara's champagne tray was more than half empty, and she needed to return to the preparation area to fetch more. She dipped her head slightly to excuse herself from the VIP section, and slipped through the crowd of guests, with the practiced ease of someone used to moving unseen. The grand hall was now packed, laughter and conversation blending with the soft music from the band in the corner, the scent of expensive perfume mixing with alcohol and food. She headed toward a side corridor leading to the kitchen area, where fewer people passed, and the air was cooler away from the harsh glow of the chandeliers. The hallway was quiet. Only the soft echo of her heels against the stone floor accompanying her steps. As she passed a small room, perhaps a storage space, or a staff break room, voices drifted out and made her stop short. Marco Benedetti's voice, low and controlled yet clear in the stillness of the corridor. Ara knew she should keep walking, pretend she hadn't heard anything, and return to her work. But there was something in that voice, a tension, a secrecy that seemed to nail her feet to the floor. "Is everything ready?" Marco asked, clearly speaking on the phone with someone. "The glass has been marked right. We need to be certain there are no mistakes. Just one glass, the one meant for him." Ara held her breath, her heart pounding violently in her chest. She knew she shouldn't listen, shouldn't be here, but she couldn't move. Marco's voice continued, cold and calculating, as if he were discussing the weather rather than something far darker. "Ricin," Marco Clear's throat said, his voice lower, but could still hear because she stood close to the wall, her ear angled toward the slightly open door, colorless, odorless. "After the speech, when he raises the glass for a toast, it'll be over. Sudden heart failure, a tragedy among the elite. No one will suspect a thing." R's blood turned to ice. Ricin. She didn't know much about poison, but she knew enough to understand it could kill. And the glass was marked. The glass meant for him. Who was him? She knew the answer before she had time to think. There was only one man here referred to with that pronoun spoken with such fear and reverence. Nicholas Salvatore. "Victoria knows the plan, right?" Marco asked, and felt her stomach twist violently. Victoria, the beautiful fiancée sitting beside Nicholas, her hand resting on his arm with practiced affection. "She knew she was part of this good," Marco said. "After he's dead, everything will belong to her, and she'll belong to me. The Salvatore empire will be ours. 10 years of waiting, 10 years of playing the loyal man. Finally rewarded." Ara heard footsteps inside the room, as if Marco were pacing back and forth. She had to get away. If he discovered she had heard this, she would die. She knew it with the same certainty that she knew the sun would rise the next morning. These people were planning to kill the most powerful mafia boss in New York. They wouldn't hesitate to eliminate an anonymous poor waitress. She stepped back slowly, carefully, trying not to make a sound, her heart racing so wildly she feared Marco might hear it. "Don't let Chef Carlo mess this up," Marco said, his voice sharpening. "Remind him. Only the glass with the green mark. No mistakes. After tonight, he'll have enough money to disappear from the country forever." Chef Carlo. The chef? Ara carved the name into her memory. Though she had no idea what she would do with it, she kept retreating one step at a time until she was far enough to turn and walk quickly toward the kitchen, forcing herself not to hurry too much, not to draw attention if anyone happened to see her. When she reached the drink preparation area, leaned against the wall, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the counter to stay upright. What had she just heard? She had just become a witness to an assassination plot. Marco Benedetti, Nicola's most trusted right hand, was planning to kill him with the help of Victoria, the fiancée he was about to marry. And a chef named Carlo would be the one to do it. Slipping ricin into the champagne glass marked in green, the glass that she, Elara Winters, the VIP server, would be the one to place into Nicholas Salvatore's hand. Ara forced herself to calm down, breathing deeply and evenly until her heart no longer felt as if it might burst from her chest. She told herself she had misheard, that maybe Marco had been talking about something else, that she was being paranoid because of stress. But deep down she knew she hadn't misheard. Every word Marco had spoken still echoed in her mind like a death nail. Ricin, the glass with the green mark. Sudden heart failure. After the speech, She shook her head hard, as if she could drive the thoughts out by force. This wasn't her business. She was just a waitress. She had nothing to do with these powerful people and their dark schemes. She only needed to finish her job, take the money, and go home to her mother and Ethan. That was all. She stepped into the drink preparation area, where rows of expensive champagne bottles stood neatly arranged and gleaming crystal glasses waited to be filled. A man in a chef's uniform stood there with his back to her doing something with a single glass set apart from the others. When he turned, ARA recognized Chef Carlo from the name tag on his chest. His face was tight with tension, sweat beating on his forehead despite the cool air. And when he saw ARA, he startled as if caught doing something wrong. "What do you need?" he asked, his voice dry and guarded. "I'm here to get more champagne for the VIP section," ARA replied, forcing her tone to remain steady. Chef Carlo nodded and stepped aside, but his eyes never left her until she picked up the prepared tray of drinks. ARA set the tray on the counter to inspect it, counting the glasses, as she always did before carrying them out. And that was when she saw it. A glass placed at the center of the tray, no different from the others at first glance, champagne bubbling golden beneath the light. But when she lifted the glass to check for smudges, as Helena had instructed, she saw something that made her heart nearly stop. A small green sticker no larger than a fingertip affixed to the bottom of the glass in a spot no one would ever see unless they deliberately turned it over. The glass with the green mark. Marco's words thundered in her head. Only the glass with the green mark. No mistakes. ARA set the glass down, her hands shaking so badly she almost spilled it. This was the glass. The glass with the ricin. The glass that would kill Nicholas Salvatore. And she was the one who would carry it to him. She would be the unknowing instrument of murder if she hadn't overheard that phone call. She stood there staring at the glass, as if it were a venomous snake ready to strike at any moment. Her mind spun with 1,000 chaotic thoughts. What should she do? Who could she tell? Who would believe her? A poor anonymous waitress accusing the powerful advisor of a mafia boss. They would laugh in her face, or worse, they would kill her to silence her. Marco had an entire network of power within this family. He had played the loyal man for 10 years. Who would believe the words of a girl they had never met over the right hand who had served them for a decade? But what if she stayed silent? What if she pretended she knew nothing and carried that glass to the VIP table, as instructed? Nicholas would raise it, would drink, and would die. A man would die by her hands, even if she hadn't meant it. She would live the rest of her life with that secret, knowing she could have stopped a murder and chose silence out of fear. Could she bear that? Could she look into her mother's eyes, into Ethan's eyes, and pretend nothing had happened? ARA thought of Nicholas. He was Mafia, a boss of the underworld, someone who might have killed, who might have done terrible things she couldn't imagine. But he was also the man who had caught her stumbling without expecting thanks. He was the man who had looked into her eyes and told her she didn't need to bow her head. He was the only person in that room full of power who had treated her like a human being. Did he deserve to die? Who had the right to decide that? Marco Benedetti, the traitor who had lain in wait for 10 years. Victoria Ashford, the fake woman willing to kill her future husband to seize his empire. She looked down at her hands. Hands that had worked relentlessly her entire life to support her family. Hands that had held her mother through nights of pain. Hands that had taught Ethan sign language when the boy was alone in his silent world. These hands would become the hands of a killer if she delivered that glass to Nicholas. Even if she hadn't poisoned it, even if she hadn't known, she would still be the final link in this murder plot. And she couldn't accept that. But if she acted, she would lose everything. Tonight's pay, her job, perhaps even her life. Her mother would have no money for medicine. Ethan would have no one to care for him. She was standing at a crossroads. One path leading to her family's safety, the other to her own conscience, and she didn't know which path she would choose. The music stopped and the lights in the grand hall softened, leaving only the spotlight trained on the stage. It was time for the speech. ARA stood at her position near the VIP table, the champagne tray steady in her hands, the glass with the green sticker resting at the center like a ticking bomb. She still hadn't decided what she would do. Her mind a storm of fear, doubt, and something that felt like anger at the injustice she had been pushed into. Nicholas stepped onto the stage amid polite applause. His stride confident and commanding, as if the world itself had been built for him to walk across. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nicholas began, his deep voice carrying through the hall. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight, not only to support the Silvertoe Foundation, but to support the children we are trying to help. Ara watched him beneath the spotlight, the light crowning him like a halo, and she thought of the children he spoke of. Children like Ethan, like herself once, poor children dreaming of chances they were never meant to have. His foundation funded scholarships for those children. And even if he was Mafia, even if he might have done terrible things, he was doing this one good thing. Who had the right to take that away? This year, Nicholas continued, we've awarded full scholarships to more than 200 students from low-income families. 200 children who now have a chance to go to school, a chance to dream, a chance to become whatever they want to be. That's why we are here tonight. Not for prestige, not for pretty photographs, but for those children. Ara swallowed. She glanced at Victoria at the VIP table, her radiant smile fixed in place, her eyes cold and untouched by his words. Then she looked at Marco, nodding with false approval while his hand clenched beneath the table, waiting for the moment everything would end. And now, Nicholas said, his voice warming, I invite all of you to raise a glass with me, to toast the future of the children we are helping, and to thank you for your generosity tonight. He stepped down from the stage to applause, and Alara knew the moment had come. She moved toward the VIP table with the champagne tray, her legs heavy as if weighted with lead, her heart pounding wildly. She set the tray down and began handing out glasses. A glass for Victoria, a glass for Marco, glasses for the other guests, and finally the glass with the green sticker, the lethal one, placed directly before Nicholas, exactly as instructed. Nicholas lifted the glass, golden bubbles shimmering beneath the lights. Ara stepped back one pace, the proper distance for an invisible server. She could stay silent. She could turn away, take her pay, and go home as if nothing had happened. Nicholas would drink, would die, and no one would know she had known. She would be safe. Her family would be safe. It was the easy choice, the choice anyone in her position would make. But Ara wasn't just anyone. She was the girl who had raised a deaf brother with bare hands while still a teenager. She was the woman who had refused to sell herself even when desperation closed in. She was the person who had taught Ethan that no matter how cruel the world was, there were still right things worth protecting. Letting a man die in front of her when she could stop, it wasn't the person she wanted to be. It wasn't the example she wanted to set for her brother. Nicholas raised the glass to his chest, smiling at the crowd. To the future, he said. To the future. The hall echoed back, a forest of crystal lifted high. Victoria smiled, anticipation lighting her eyes. Marco clenched his fist beneath the table, jaw tight. Nicholas brought the glass to his lips, and acted. She didn't think or calculate. She moved on pure instinct. She lunged forward, and before anyone could understand what was happening, she drove her fist straight into Nicolas Salvatore's face. The punch was hard enough that pain shot through her knuckles, but it did what she needed. The champagne glass flew from Nicolas' hand, arcing through the air in slow motion before shattering across the black marble with a sharp crash that rang through the deadly silence. 1 second, 2 seconds. The entire hall froze as if under a spell. No one breathed. No one moved. Then hell broke loose. Assassin! Someone screamed. She's an assassin. Security surged in from every direction like wolves, guns drawn, metal clattering. Was slammed to the floor with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs. Her face pressed against cold stone, her arms wrenched behind her back. Someone drove a boot into her spine. Someone yanked her hair. She heard Victoria screaming somewhere above. Her voice shrill with fury. Get her. She tried to kill Nicholas. Kill her. Marco's voice cut through the chaos. Cold and decisive. Take her to the basement. I'll handle her myself. Ara was dragged across the floor, marble scraping her skin, her head striking table legs. She didn't fight back. She gathered what strength she had left and screamed, her voice tearing through the uproar. That glass was poisoned. Check the glass. There's a green sticker on the bottom. No one listened or no one wanted to. She kept screaming until she was dragged into an elevator and the doors slammed shut, swallowing her voice into darkness. The basement room was freezing and pitch black, lit only by a single bare bulb casting a dull yellow glow over a metal chair positioned at the center. Aloe was shoved into the chair with enough force that she nearly fell. Her hands cuffed tightly behind her back, cold metal biting into the skin of her wrists. She tasted blood in her mouth from the split lip she'd suffered when she was slammed to the floor in the grand hall, and one side of her face was swelling from where it had struck a table leg. But she didn't cry. She'd learned not to cry when she was very young. From nights when her stepfather came home drunk and took his rage out on her mother. From days of hunger so sharp her stomach cramped, while she still smiled at Ethan so he wouldn't be afraid. Tears didn't solve anything. Tears were a weakness she couldn't afford. The door opened and Marco Benedetti walked in, followed by two guards built like walking walls. He removed his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his dress shirt, as if preparing for physical labor. The yellow light carving harsh shadows across his face. "Close the door," Marco ordered. And the door slammed shut behind the guards, leaving her alone with the man she knew wanted Nicholas dead. Alone with the man who now certainly wanted her dead as well. Marco pulled another chair close and sat facing her, so near she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with whiskey. He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes alike with the cruelty she had sensed beneath his polished exterior earlier that evening. Then he spoke, his voice disturbingly gentle. "Who sent you here?" "No one," Arara replied, her voice fierce but steady. "I'm just a waitress," Marco nodded as if considering her answer. Then, without warning, slapped her across the face. The blow snapped her head to the side, her ears ringing for seconds as the taste of blood deepened in her mouth. "Don't play games," Marco said, his tone still mild, as if he'd merely asked about her health instead of striking her. "Who do you work for? Rishi Colombo or someone out of Chicago sent you?" Ara lifted her head and looked straight into his eyes despite the pain throbbing through her face. "I don't work for anyone. The champagne glass was poisoned. You need to check it." Marco laughed, the sound cold and empty. "Poison?" He stood and began to circle her like a predator stalking prey. A poor waitress from the Bronx suddenly knows about poisons and assassination plots. Fascinating. How stupid do you think I am? He stopped behind her and Alara felt his breath against her neck, cold as air from hell. "I'll ask you one last time." Marco whispered beside her ear. "Who sent you? Give me a name and I'll let you die quickly. Refuse and I'll make you beg for death for hours." Ara swallowed, her heart pounding like a war drum, but she refused to let fear show on her face. "No one sent me. I heard you on the phone in the hallway. You talked about the marked glass, about ricin, about killing Nicholas after the speech. I saw the green sticker under the glass. I know what you're doing." Marco froze for a moment, the silence turning thick enough to cut. Then he stepped back in front of her, his face twisted with rage, all traces of refinement gone. "You heard me," he hissed. "How much did you hear?" Ara met his gaze, and in that instant, she chose to tell the truth, because lying wouldn't save her, and the truth might frighten him. "I heard," Clear's throat, "everything. Ricin, Chef Carlo, Victoria, the Salvatore Empire going to you after Nicholas dies. 10 years of pretending to be loyal. I heard it all." Marco slapped her again and again and again. Each blow harder than the last. All's head snapping back and forth like a broken puppet. She felt blood streaming from her nose, from her lips. Iron filling her mouth. But she didn't beg. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She only stared at him with eyes that refused to yield and that seemed to drive him further into madness. "Who do you think you are?" Marco shouted, his control shattering. "You think you can ruin my plan? You're nothing but a nobody waitress. I'll kill you, and tomorrow, no one will know you ever existed." He drew a gun from his holster, the cold click of the chamber echoing through the room. Ara looked at the barrel pointed at her head and thought of her mother. Thought of Ethan, thought of promises she would never be able to keep. But she didn't regret her choice. She had done the right thing. She had tried to save a man from being murdered by a traitor. Even if she died here, she would die with a clean conscience. But Marco never pulled the trigger. The door burst open with a thunderous crash. And standing in the doorway, grey as cold as a blizzard and his face utterly unreadable, was Nicholas Salvatore. Nicholas stood in the doorway like a statue carved from stone and shadow. Grey eyes sweeping the room in a single second and taking in everything. Ara with her bruised face and blood at her lip. Marco with a gun in his hand and the look of a man caught in the act. The air was so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. Tony Russo stood just behind Nicholas, his hand resting near the gun at his side, ready to move if needed. Marco lowered the weapon at once, his expression shifting swiftly from rage to a carefully masked concern. "Boss," he said, his voice slipping back into professional calm, as if nothing had happened. "I'm interrogating the attacker. She won't say who sent her." Nicholas didn't answer right away. He stepped into the room, each footfall heavy against the cold concrete, and stopped between Marco and Ara like a wall made of flesh and will. "Leave," he said, his voice low and even, but carrying a weight that allowed no argument. Marco blinked, surprise flashing briefly across his face before disappearing. "Boss, she's dangerous. Let me handle it." "Leave," Nicholas repeated. This time, turning to look directly into Marco's eyes, and saw Marco shudder despite his effort to hide it. "I'll handle this myself." Marco hesitated for a heartbeat, his gaze sliding toward with a silent threat. Then he bowed his head. "Yes, boss." He walked out, his shoulders rigid, and the door clicked shut behind him. Nicholas motioned for Tony to stand at the corner of the room, then pulled the chair Marco had used and placed it in front of Ara. He sat down, resting his hands on his knees, and studied her in silence for a long moment. Ara met his gaze, her face throbbing, the taste of blood still in her mouth. But she didn't lower her head. She remembered what he had told her earlier and kept her back straight, even though everything inside her was screaming with pain and exhaustion. He looked at her as if trying to read a book written in a language he had never seen. Grey eyes deep and unreadable. "You punched me," Nicholas finally said. Not a question, but a statement. "In front of 300 people, you punched the most powerful mafia boss in New York." "In front of 300 people," nodded. There was nothing to deny. "Why?" he asked, his voice still calm, but edged with genuine curiosity. "Because you were about to die," answered, her throat dry and her voice, but every word clear. "That champagne glass was poisoned. There was a green sticker on the bottom to mark it. I heard someone talking about the marked glass and the plan to poison you after the speech." Nicholas didn't react, his face still carved from stone, but caught something flicker in his eyes. Interest perhaps, suspicion perhaps, or both. "Where did you hear this?" he asked. "In the hallway," Ara said. "When I went to get more champagne. Someone was on the phone in a small room. I heard them talk about ricin, about the glass with the green mark, about you dying from sudden heart failure so no one would suspect anything." "Who said it?" Ara hesitated. She remembered Marco's voice, remembered his words, but she also knew Marco was Nicholas' right hand, the most trusted man in this family. If she accused him and Nicholas didn't believe her, she would die. But if she said nothing and Nicholas didn't know who the real enemy was, he would remain in danger. "I didn't see a face," she finally said, choosing to hold back part of the truth. "I only heard a man's voice, but I saw the green sticker. I saw it myself when I checked the glass before bringing it out. It was under the base, no bigger than a fingertip. Green? You can check. The broken glass is still on the floor in the hall." Nicholas watched her a moment longer, grey eyes digging as if searching her soul for lies. All didn't look away, because she had nothing to hide, because she was telling the truth. And because if he intended to kill her, she had already done everything she could. "Why?" Nicholas asked softly, almost a whisper. "You don't know me. I could be a monster. I could have killed people. Why risk everything for someone like me?" All was silent for a moment, considering the question, because no matter who you are, she finally said, no one deserves to die by betrayal. And because she hesitated, searching for the right words. "You were the first person who looked me in the eye and told me I didn't need to bow my head." Something shifted in Nicholas' gaze, just for an instant, like a hairline crack forming in eternal ice. Then he stood, pulled out his phone, and turned away from her. "Tony," he said, "have someone collect the fragments of the champagne glass from the hall. Every piece, especially anything with a green sticker on the bottom. Send them for testing immediately. I want results within 2 hours." Tony nodded and left to carry out the order. Nicholas turned back to this time, there was something different in his eyes. Not entirely cold anymore. "If you're lying," he said slowly, "I'll bury you myself. But if you're telling the truth," he paused as if weighing the words. "If you're telling the truth, I'll owe you my life." Then he walked out, leaving alone in the freezing basement with a fragile hope that the truth would save her and the fear that it might not be enough. 2 hours passed like 2 centuries. Ara sat in the freezing basement, her hands still cuffed behind her back, her body aching from Marco's blows. Yet her mind was strangely clear. She thought of her mother lying in a hospital bed waiting for her to come home. Thought of Ethan, who was probably awake and watching the door with worried eyes. Thought of everything she would lose if Nicholas didn't believe her. But she also thought of what she had done, of choosing what was right instead of what was safe. And no matter the outcome, she didn't regret it. The door opened and Nicholas walked in with Tony, his face still as unreadable as stone. But in his hand was a file she guessed held the answer to her fate. Nicholas sat down on the chair in front of her, opened the file, and read in silence. All watched him, trying to read the result from his expression, but his face was an impenetrable wall. Then he looked up, grey eyes fixed on her, and spoke in an even low voice. Ricin. The champagne glass contained ricin, a dose strong enough to kill a healthy adult within 24 hours. The symptoms would mimic sudden heart failure. No one would suspect anything. You told the truth. Ara let out a breath. She hadn't realized she was holding and felt as if an invisible weight had lifted from her body. She wasn't going to die. At least not today. But Nicholas wasn't finished. He turned to the next page of the file and his voice grew colder, sharper, like a blade being honed. We checked the security cameras. Every corner of the hotel has cameras, including the drink preparation area. Ara felt her heart quicken as he continued. The footage shows Chef Carlo setting aside a single champagne glass with a green sticker on the bottom, separated from the others. And 30 minutes earlier, the hallway cameras recorded a man entering a storage room and making a phone call. He paused and looked at her with eyes she couldn't read. You said you didn't see his face, but the cameras did. It was Marco Benedetti. Lara wasn't surprised, but hearing Nicholas confirm what she already knew, still sent a chill through her. Marco, Nicholas' right hand, the most trusted man in the family, was the one trying to kill him. She saw Nicholas grip the file so hard the papers crumpled, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his controlled exterior. There's more, he said, his voice sounding like it came from hell. We reviewed all the footage from tonight. Marco and Victoria met in private 3 times in blind spots they believed were not covered. They kissed. They exchanged documents. They're accomplices. Victoria, the beautiful fiancée with the false smile and ice-cold eyes. Ara wasn't surprised. She had seen the looks they shared during the gala. The secret touches beneath the table. But what Nicholas said next truly stunned her. Tony dug deeper, he said, his voice lowering like the growl of an approaching storm. Bank accounts, encrypted messages, hidden transactions. Marco has been transferring money to Victoria for 5 years. They've been planning this for a long time, waiting for the right moment. Then Nicholas stopped. And saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Pain. A deep, ancient pain. Like a wound that had never healed. But that's not the worst of it, he said, his voice tightening. Tony found proof that Marco was the one who leaked my father's location to the Rishi family 10 years ago. My father was assassinated in an ambush. And for 10 years, I hunted the traitor. For 10 years, I wondered who sold my father out. And for those 10 years, Marco stood beside me, comforted me, pretended loyalty, while he was the one who killed my father. I looked at Nicholas and for the first time saw him not as a terrifying mafia boss, but as a man facing the most brutal betrayal imaginable. The man he trusted most, the man his father trusted most, was the one who murdered his father and was now trying to murder him. For 10 years, he held me while I cried at my father's funeral, Nicholas said, his voice distant. For 10 years, he swore loyalty to me in blood. For 10 years, he looked me in the eye and called me the son he never had. And it was all a lie. Nicholas stood abruptly and turned his back to, his shoulders rigid, his fists clenched at his sides. He stood there in silence for a long time, and when he turned back, his face had returned to its familiar cold mask, but his grey eyes were no longer frozen. They burned with a fire knew would consume everyone who had betrayed him. Tony, Nicholas said, his voice cold as steel. Unlock her cuffs, get her medical care in a clean room. She's my guest from now on. Then he walked toward the door, paused at the threshold, and added without turning around. As for Marco and Victoria, lock them up. I'll handle them myself and find Chef Carlo before he attempts to flee the city. He will not escape the price of this treachery. Marco Benedetti was held in another room in the basement, his hands tightly bound to a chair. 4 guards standing around him with guns ready. When Nicholas entered, Marco lifted his head, his face still trying to maintain the calm of an innocent man wrongly accused. But saw the fear flickering deep in his eyes when she followed Nicholas into the room. Nicholas had asked her to come along without explaining why, and she didn't ask. Perhaps he wanted her to witness justice being carried out. Or perhaps he wanted her to confirm what she had heard. Whatever the reason, she stood in the corner, silent, watching like a shadow. Nicholas said nothing. He simply pulled a chair forward, set it in front of Marco, and sat down, grey eyes fixed on the man who had betrayed him for 10 years. The silence stretched until it became suffocating, heavy as stone, pressing on the chest. Marco was the first to break it. His voice still clinging to a mask of innocence. Nicholas, there's been a misunderstanding. I don't know anything about poisoning. That girl is lying to save herself. You know me. I've served this family my whole life. I served your father the same way I served you. Nicholas didn't respond. He reached into his jacket, took out a photograph, and placed it on the table in front of Marco. Ara couldn't see the image clearly, but she saw Marco's face drain of color when he looked at it. My father, Nicholas finally said, his voice low and slow like water dripping in a cavern. My father trusted you more than anyone. You were the only one who knew his location that night. You were the only one who could have sold that information to the Reikai family. And for 10 years, you stood beside me, pretending grief, pretending loyalty, while my father's blood was still on your hands. Marco opened his mouth to speak, to deny, to explain. But Nicholas raised his hand, and Marco fell silent, as if his throat had been crushed. I don't need to hear you, Nicholas said, his voice cold as ice. I have proof. Bank transfers, encrypted messages, statements from the men you paid to pass information to Reikai. I know everything. And do you know what hurts the most? He paused, leaning forward, grey eyes burning like twin pits of fire. It isn't that you tried to kill me tonight. It's that for 10 years, every year on my father's birthday, you went to his grave with me and laid flowers. Every year, you looked me in the eye and said you'd never stop hunting the man who killed my father. And we both know you were staring into a mirror. Marco began to tremble, the last mask of composure finally shattering, revealing a coward facing death. Nicholas, he stammered. Please listen to me. I didn't have a choice. Your father wouldn't understand. There were things I had to do to survive. Survive. Nicholas repeated the word, as if it was something foul. You killed my father to survive. You pushed a 26-year-old into the role of boss of the largest underworld empire in New York without guidance to survive. You watched me struggle, suffer, and carry everything alone for 10 years to survive. Nicholas stood, drew the gun from his holster with slow, deliberate movements. Marco screamed, begged, tears streaming down his twisted face in terror. Nicholas didn't listen. He raised the gun, aimed it straight at Marco's head, and spoke in a voice devoid of emotion. You had 10 years to live. That's 10 years more than you deserved. A single gunshot rang out, sharp and final, and Marco Benedetti collapsed. His betrayal finally paid in blood. Valera stood in the corner, unblinking, unmoving. She had witnessed a killing. Yet she felt no horror, only the sense that a brutal kind of justice had been carried out. Nicholas walked out of the room with the gun still in his hand, and noticed his hand trembling slightly, something no one else would have seen. He had just killed the man who had been his surrogate father for a decade. Even if that man was a traitor, that wasn't easy. No matter who he was, Victoria was dealt with differently. She was the daughter of Frank Ashford, the Chicago Mafia boss, and killing her would have meant war between families. Instead, Nicholas sent all the evidence of her plot to her father, along with video footage of Victoria kissing Marco and discussing the plan to kill Nicholas. Frank Ashford, a man who valued honor above all else, disowned his daughter immediately. Victoria was stripped of all power, all money, all protection from the Ashford family. She was expelled from New York that very night, left with nothing but the clothes she wore and a burning hatred in her eyes, as she looked back at Ara one last time before disappearing into the darkness. 3 days passed since that fateful night. 3 days during which Ara stayed in a luxurious room at the Obsidian Hotel, treated by a private doctor for her injuries, served meals she had never dared to dream of. Yet every night she woke with worry for her mother and Ethan, wondering if they were all right, wondering when she would be able to go home. Nicholas had sent word to her family saying she was safe and would return soon, but she still couldn't rest easy. On the afternoon of the third day, Tony knocked on her door and said the boss wanted to see her. Ara followed him through long corridors into an elevator and finally stopped before a large oak door leading to the private office of Nicola Salvatore. The room was vast, with windows of glass stretching from floor to ceiling, overlooking all of Manhattan, afternoon sunlight pouring in and casting bands of gold across the polished wood floor. Nicholas stood with his back to her, gazing out at the city below, his silhouette dark against the blue sky. When he heard the door close, he turned and noticed the weariness in his grey eyes, as if he hadn't slept much in the past 3 days either. You saved my life, Nicholas said without preamble or polite formalities. No one does that without a reason. What do you want? Ara stood there, Her hands clenched at the hem of her clothes, and considered the question. She could ask for money. She could ask for enough to pay off the debts, to buy medicine for her mother, to send Ethan to a good school. Nicholas would certainly give it to her because his life was worth more than any amount of money. But something inside her rejected that thought. Rejected the idea of taking money as a reward for doing what was right. I don't want anything, she finally said, her voice soft but firm. I just want to go home to my mother and my brother. Nicholas raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his usually unreadable face. Your mother has stage 3 cancer. Your brother is deaf from birth. You owe nearly $90,000. You're about to be evicted. And you're saying you don't want anything. All froze. You know, she said, not as a question. I know everything about the people around me, Nicholas replied, walking toward her with slow, measured steps. I know you lost your job because you refused to sell yourself. I know you punched a mafia boss in front of 300 people, knowing it could get you killed. You're the strangest person I've ever met, Ara Winters. He stopped in front of her, and from this distance she could see the tired lines on his face, the shadows beneath his eyes, and something like genuine curiosity in his grey gaze. He held out a thick envelope. $100,000, he said. Enough to clear your debts and take care of your mother for a year. Alla looked at the envelope, at the sum that could change her life, then slowly pushed it back toward him. I can't take that. It's too much, and I don't want to owe you anything. Nicholas looked at her, as if she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. This is the first time in my life someone has refused my money, he said, his tone carrying a trace of something like amusement. So, what do you want? Ara drew a deep breath, gathering the courage to say what she truly wanted. A job, she said, meeting his eyes. A real job. Let me take care of my family with my own work. Not with charity or gratitude. I don't need handouts. I need an opportunity. Nicholas was silent for a long moment, his grey eyes studying her with an expression she couldn't read. Then he nodded slowly, as if making an important decision. You have sharp eyes, he said. You see what no one else sees, and you have the courage to act. I need those eyes. I need that honesty. All didn't know what she was stepping into. But she knew this was the only chance she had, and she wouldn't let it slip away. Yes, she said, her voice steadier than ever. I agree. Ara's life changed completely in just a few short weeks. She became the personal assistant to Nicola Salvatore, a position she had never dared to dream of, with a salary of $15,000 a month and comprehensive medical insurance for her entire family. On her first day at work, she stood in her new office on the top floor of the Salvatore Holdings building, looking out over Manhattan, spread wide below, and wondered if this was all a dream. Only a few weeks earlier, she had been standing in a damp apartment in the Bronx, counting every coin to buy stale bread for her brother. Now she stood among glass walls and expensive furniture, with a completely different future opening in front of her. The first thing Nicholas did was move her mother to the best hospital in New York, a private medical facility with leading oncology specialists and the most advanced treatments available. Margaret was given a private room with a window overlooking a park, nurses on duty 24 hours a day, and full access to medication without any concern for cost. The first time visited her mother in the new hospital, Margaret cried, not from pain, but from happiness, because for the first time, she could fight the illness without fearing that she was dragging her daughter into an abyss of debt. My brave daughter, Margaret said as she held hand, her voice trembling with emotion. You saved a man and you saved our whole family. Ethan was accepted into the best school for deaf children in the city, a place with specialized programs and professionally trained teachers. The 8-year-old boy had friends like him for the first time. Children who communicated in sign language, and saw her brother's eyes light up in a way she had never seen before. He was no longer alone in his silent world. Their family moved into a new apartment that was clean and safe with 2 bedrooms and a fully equipped kitchen. No mold, no crawling roaches, no rusted pipes. For the first time in her life, had a room of her own, small but completely hers. Working beside Nicholas wasn't easy, but she found herself enjoying it in a strange way. She managed his schedule, arranged meetings, accompanied him to important events, and most of all, she observed Nicholas needed her sharp eyes, her ability to notice details others overlooked, and she didn't disappoint him. In a meeting with business partners, she noticed one man constantly glancing at his phone with nervous tension. And later, Nicholas discovered he was secretly communicating with a rival. At a charity event, she spotted a guest with unusual behavior, and Tony was able to stop a thief who planned to take advantage of the occasion. She worked next to Nicholas every day and gradually saw both sides of him. In meetings with enemies, he was cold and ruthless, grey as sharp as steel, and a voice that could make the most powerful men tremble. But when he visited the orphanage funded by the Salvatore Foundation, she saw him sit on the floor playing with children, a rare smile softening the hard lines of his face. He quietly donated millions of dollars to a children's hospital without anyone knowing. Signed large checks for scholarships for poor students without asking for thanks. The devil everyone feared was also doing good things, even if he hid them as though they were weaknesses. She also learned about his past through fragments Tony revealed without meaning to. His mother left when he was 10, leaving him with a strict father and a vast criminal empire. His father was assassinated when he was 26, forcing him into the role of boss far too young, making him learn to be hard and ruthless to survive in a world with no room for weakness. He carried the entire empire on his shoulders for 10 years with no one to lean on and no one to trust until Marco's betrayal left him even more alone. Looked at him and no longer saw a devil. She saw a lonely man, strong but deeply scarred, and she wondered if anyone had ever truly seen him the way she now did. The following weeks passed and began to realize that something was changing between her and Nicholas. Something she didn't dare name but couldn't deny. It began with small things, moments others might overlook, but she never did. The way he looked at her a little longer than necessary, when she reported the morning schedule, the way he always made sure there was a cup of hot coffee waiting on her desk when she arrived, even though he never admitted he was the one who put it there. The way he asked about her mother every day, not out of social courtesy, but because he genuinely wanted to know. And the way he remembered her mother's name, remembered what Ethan liked to eat, remembered the small details of her life she didn't even recall telling him. One afternoon, ARA picked Ethan up from school and brought him to the office because there was no one to watch him. She worried Nicholas would be annoyed since this was a professional workplace, but he only nodded and said it was fine. She set Ethan down to draw in a corner while she worked, glancing over from time to time to make sure he wasn't causing trouble. But when she finally looked up from a stack of papers, she froze at the sight before her. Nicholas was crouched beside Ethan, and his large hands were awkwardly forming shapes. He was signing to her brother slowly and imperfectly, but clearly with some practice behind it. Ethan stared at him with wide eyes of surprise, then smiled, the brightest smile had ever seen on her brother's face, and signed back more slowly so Nicholas could understand. Valera stood there gripping the edge of the desk, feeling something inside her chest crack open and melt. He had learned sign language. The most powerful mafia boss in New York, the man the entire city feared, had taken the time to learn how to communicate with her 8-year-old deaf brother. She didn't know when he learned or where. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that he had done it. And he had done it for her, for Ethan, for a reason she didn't dare name. He's teaching me chess. Ethan signed excitedly when came closer, his eyes shining. He said he'll teach me until I beat him, but I think he's really good, so I have to learn a lot. ARA looked at Nicholas, not knowing what to say. And he only shrugged, as if learning sign language for an 8-year-old was the most ordinary thing in the world. He's a smart kid, Nicholas said. He deserves to be spoken to like a person, not ignored just because he can't make sound. That night, after taking Ethan home and making sure he was asleep, ARA returned to the office to finish some unfinished work. She didn't expect Nicholas to still be there. Standing by the window, looking out at the city at night, a glass of whiskey in his hand that he didn't seem to be drinking. She stopped at the doorway, about to turn back, but he saw her in the reflection of the glass. "Come in," he said without turning around. ARA stepped inside, standing a few steps away, silently looking out at the glowing Manhattan skyline below. "Why did you do that?" she finally asked, her voice barely a breath. "Why did you learn sign language for Ethan?" Nicholas was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was deeper than usual, softer than usual. "Because I was a child no one saw, too. My mother left. My father was too busy with his empire. I grew up in a house full of people, but no one really talked to me." He turned to her, grey eyes meeting hers with a sincerity she had never seen before. "Ethan is a part of you. And you." He paused as if searching for the right words. "You're the first person in 10 years who's made me want to be better." ARA felt her heart pounding so hard she thought he might hear it. He had just called her you. Not she, not, but you. A small word carrying an entire world of meaning. She looked at him standing there, city lights painting shadows across his face, and realized she wasn't afraid of him anymore. She didn't see a devil anymore. She only saw a lonely man, wounded and scarred, still trying to do good in his own way. Nicholas stepped closer, each movement slow, as if he feared she might run. He stopped right in front of her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, could smell the faint mix of his cologne and whiskey. "May I?" he asked softly. And she knew he was asking permission, even though he was a man who never asked anyone for anything. She didn't answer with words, only nodded slightly, and he bent down and kissed her. The kiss was gentle and trembling, as if she was something precious he was afraid to break. His lips were warm and soft, nothing like the cold, hardened image he showed the world. All closed her eyes and let herself sink into the moment when an invisible girl from the Bronx was kissed by the most powerful man in New York. Not because she had saved his life, not out of gratitude, but because of something real and deeper, something neither of them dared name anymore, but could no longer deny. Happiness was as fragile as morning dew, and should have known that darkness never spares those who dare to reach for the light. 2 weeks after their first kiss, she and Nicholas were slowly building something neither of them dared to name. Late dinners in the office, conversations that stretched deep into the night, stolen kisses when no one was watching. She felt happy in a way she had never believed she was allowed to feel. But someone refused to let her keep that happiness. Victoria Ashford, though exiled and disowned, hadn't forgotten her hatred. From exile in a distant city, she followed every piece of news about Nicholas and the new woman by his side. The poor former waitress who had destroyed everything she had built. And she wanted revenge. That afternoon, went to pick Ethan up from school as she always did, unaware that 2 black cars had been following her since morning. The moment she took her brother's hand and stepped out of the school gate, everything happened too fast for her to react. A car screeched to a stop in front of them. 2 men in black rushed out, one clamping a drug-soaked cloth over her mouth while the other restrained Ethan as he struggled. She tried to fight, tried to scream, but the chemical burned her lungs and her head spun as the world slipped into darkness. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was Ethan's terrified eyes and his small hands signing desperately, calling for his sister. When Arara woke up, she was lying on cold concrete in an abandoned warehouse. Her hands tied behind her back and her mouth sealed with tape. Her head throbbed and her body shook from cold and fear. Where was Ethan? Was the first thought cutting through the pain. She scanned the room in panic and sagged with relief when she saw him curled in a corner, also tied, but seemingly unharmed. He looked at her with red, swollen eyes, tears streaming down his face. And when he saw she was awake, he tried to sign with bound fingers. "Sister, I'm scared." The warehouse door opened and a figure stepped inside, high heels clicking against the concrete. Victoria Ashford stood there, no longer glamorous like the Galanite, but gaunt and unhinged. Blonde hair tangled, blue eyes burning with hatred. She looked at like something to be crushed underfoot. "You ruined everything for me," Victoria hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "My money, my position, my future. All for a cheap serving girl. Now I'll ruin everything Nicholas loves, starting with you." At Silvertoe Holdings, Nicholas received a call from Ethan's school saying no one had come to pick the boy up and they couldn't reach ARA. His heart clenched as he called her and heard only ringing into nothingness. He called Tony, every contact he had, and within an hour, he knew the truth. Security cameras near the school showed the abduction. 2 black cars, 4 men, ARA and Ethan taken, and a message from Victoria appeared on his phone with simple words, "Now you know how it feels to lose everything." Nicholas lost control. There was no other way to describe it. He smashed everything within reach. Barked orders in a voice that sounded like it came from hell. Mobilized the entire family to find Ara. Every lead, every camera, every street informant in New York was activated. He put a bounty of $1 million on any information. And when one of Victoria's men was captured and revealed the warehouse location, Nicholas didn't wait. He led the rescue himself, gun in hand, grey eyes burning with a fury nothing could extinguish. They reached the warehouse at midnight. Nicholas didn't wait for security to clear the way. He kicked the door in himself and stormed inside like a demon unleashed. 7 hired killers stood in his path, and he dropped them within minutes. Shots precise and merciless without hesitation. When he found in the shadows, her face bruised from Victoria's blows, but her eyes still unbroken. Something inside his chest shattered. He cut her bonds and pulled her into his arms, trembling for the first time in front of anyone. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry I let you get hurt. I'll never let this happen again. Never." Victoria was arrested at the scene, screaming and cursing like a mad woman. Nicholas didn't kill her. Not out of mercy, but because he had another plan. He sent her back to Frank Ashford, her father, along with evidence of child abduction and a second attempted murder. Frank Ashford, who had disowned his daughter once for betrayal, now faced the truth that she had crossed every possible line. In the mafia world, kidnapping women and children was unforgivable. And Frank knew that if he didn't deal with his own blood, the other families would see weakness. A week later, news reached New York that Victoria Ashford had died in a car accident in the suburbs of Chicago. No one believed it was an accident, but no one asked questions. In this world, justice wore many faces, and sometimes it came from the very people one called family. 1 month after the kidnapping, Margaret Winters passed away in her sleep, peaceful and without pain, surrounded by Ethan and Nicholas. The cancer finally won. But Margaret left this world with a smile on her lips, knowing her daughter was loved and her son would be cared for. Before closing her eyes, she held Nicholas' hand and whispered in a voice as fragile as a single thread, "Take care of my daughter. She's endured too much. She deserves to be loved." Nicholas tightened his grip on her hand, and for the first time, his grey eyes glistened with tears in front of another person. "I promise," he said, his voice breaking. Ara cried through the entire night in Nicholas' arms, and he stayed with her, never leaving her side, saying nothing except holding her while she cried until there were no tears left. For the first time in her life, she had a shoulder to lean on, a place to hide. And though losing her mother was a pain nothing could replace, she knew she wasn't alone in this world anymore. 1 year passed. Ara stood in the office of the Salvatore Foundation, looking out over Manhattan, glowing in the afternoon sun, and felt a sense of peace she had never believed she would know. She was no longer an assistant. Nicholas had entrusted her with running the foundation's scholarship program, a position created just for her. "You see what others don't," he had said when he offered her the role. "You understand what poor children need because you were one of them. I want you to find students like you, talented but without opportunity, and give them the door you never had." And she did exactly that. Over the past year, she interviewed hundreds of students, read thousands of applications, and gave opportunities to more than 300 children from struggling families. Every time she saw a child's eyes light upon hearing they'd received a scholarship, she remembered the faded forms she once hid beneath a mattress, and she knew she was doing the right thing. Ethan was now 9 years old, a cheerful and confident boy, top of his class, and surrounded by friends. He called Nicholas brother Nico in sign language, and the bond between them always made a smile. Nicholas taught Ethan chess every Sunday night, and the boy had begun beating him in a few games, something Nicholas pretended to be annoyed by, but was secretly proud of. The old damp apartment in the Bronx was now only a distant memory. They lived in a warm house with a small garden where planted roses in memory of her mother, and Ethan had his own room filled with books and toys. That evening, Nicholas took to the rooftop of the Salvatore Foundation building where a small garden bloomed beneath the sunset. He'd prepared a quiet dinner for just the two of them. Candles flickering, red wine poured, Manhattan spreading below them like a carpet of light. Ara looked at him in surprise, wondering what special occasion she'd forgotten. Nicholas led her to the railing overlooking the city, then turned to her with grey eyes softer than she'd ever seen. "1 year ago," he began, his deep voice steady in the still air. "You punched me in the face in front of 300 people," laughed, remembering that reckless moment that had changed her entire life. "It was the most painful punch I've ever taken," Nicholas continued. "But it was also the punch that saved my life. You gave me a chance to live. And more than that, you gave me a reason to live." He dropped to one knee, pulled a small black velvet box from his pocket, and when he opened it, Ara saw a diamond ring sparkling in the candlelight. "You taught me there's still goodness in this world, that there are still people willing to do the right thing, even when it costs them everything. You taught me how to trust again, how to love again. Ara Winters, will you be my wife?" Ara stood there, tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were tears of happiness, the kind she never thought she'd be allowed to cry. She looked at the man kneeling before her, the man the city called a devil, but who was an angel to her. And she knew her answer long before he finished asking. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I will." Nicholas stood, slid the ring onto her finger, and kissed her there in the rooftop garden with all of New York City as their witness. And that's how an invisible girl from the Bronx found the one person who truly saw her. That's how a devil found a reason to become human. That's how a love born from darkness came to shine brighter than any light in the city that never sleeps. This story teaches us that sometimes the right thing is also the hardest thing to do. But if we have the courage to act according to our conscience, life will find a way to reward us. Allah had nothing but honesty and courage. And those were the very things that changed her entire life. She didn't beg, didn't plead, didn't sell her dignity, even in her darkest moments. And when opportunity came, she took it with her own hands. The greatest lesson of this story is that no matter how poor you are, no matter how much you're looked down upon, you still have the right to choose who you become. And that choice, not money or status, is what truly defines you. Thank you for listening to this story all the way to the end. If this story touched your heart, please like and share this video with those you love so they can hear a meaningful story, too. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our daily stories. We'd love to know how this story made you feel. Have you ever faced a difficult choice between safety and doing the right thing? Have you ever met someone who changed your life the way Nicholas changed? Please share your thoughts and stories in the comments below because we truly want to hear the voices that come from deep within your hearts. And because every story deserves to be told and heard. I wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace each day. No matter how hard life gets, always remember that after the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the places we least expect. Thank you once again. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next video.